Trauma. Everyone has it. No one talks about it. It seems easier to stay silent, ignore it, or stuff it than it does to honor it, learn from it, and finally heal. Trauma is debilitating, yet so often we suffer in silence. Trauma is not meant to be battled alone, and we are no longer going to suffer in silence. Together, we are creating a safe place to speak, to share our stories, and grow our strength as we heal. Together, we are giving a voice to those who have been silenced, bringing darkness into light, and letting God use our stories. Today, we find ourselves again. We relight our spark and let it light up the world. Stop SIS is a nonprofit organization dedicated to educating on issues of trauma and trafficking, as well as the amazing power of the healing journey. Welcome to Stop SIS. Big welcome back to Stop SIS, Stop Suffering in Silence. My name is Denise Walsh, and I'm here with co-host Rachel Timothy. And today you are in for a treat, if that's what we want to call it. I mean, I really do think that the conversation we're going to have today is one that people need to hear, kind of whether we like it or not. Today's conversation will be about opening blind eyes into the reality of trafficking itself. There are a lot of ways that one can experience trauma, especially a trauma that's consistent over time, repeated trauma. There's a lot of different stories out there, and we will continue to highlight as many as possible. Today, we're going to talk about specifically trafficking. So before we jump into the conversation, I want to say a big thank you to those who have given donations over the past few weeks. We are going on a retreat in just a few days. In fact, by the time you get this, we'll have just finished, and we can't wait to tell you all about it. But we're taking 7 survivors who just finished 90-day U-turn on a 4-day retreat in Tennessee, and we couldn't be more excited. And your donations directly go to helping survivors from chronic trauma heal, get their life back. And just know that everything that you give is going towards these experiences. And we thank you. The girls thank you. And really, we've also had people donate stuff too. We've had churches donate. We've had gift cards donated. We've had gift baskets donated. So thank you to everybody who's been involved. We so appreciate it. All right, Miss Rachel. Hey guys, editing Denise popping in to give a bit of a disclaimer. In this conversation, Rachel talks about some hard things that she experienced and she saw other girls experience. And so this is a bit of a trigger warning. If it would not be helpful for you to hear about these experiences, then I absolutely recommend that you come back at a different time. It's a tough conversation, but I'm glad we had it. What do you feel led to share?
I don't even know if it's going to make sense, but when you get put into a life of evil and you're an innocent child and you see other children hurt, like I remember being at that small white house and hearing cries of other girls. I remember praying for angels to come and take me home. I remember knowing that that voice outside that door is in the process of coming in and what evil was going to happen. And usually each person would have this fantasy that they had come up with in their mind, whether it was from watching porn or whatever. And then they expect to do that to you. And you're 10 years old. And so I don't know how to explain the darkness that just covers the whole world. And you do everything that you can to try to make life normal. And so I did that. I tried to make life normal. I tried to still be good at my grades and still do sports and still have friends. I would try to push everything aside that seemed confusing but it built up, and I began to cut and I began to hurt so deeply, and I had no idea what to do. And I think I'm as I'm talking to people and I'm hearing their stories and I'm seeing where they were silenced and they carried this pain that no child should ever have to carry, and they carry it with them to where it begins to suck the life out of them. I mean, there's people that I know to this day who are in their 70s and their 80s who can't function because of what somebody did to them when they were a child. And so many times I hear people who haven't been hurt say, "Oh, they were just touched once," or it really isn't that big of a deal. There was this man from my community, an older man who touched his granddaughters, and he had this thing in his mind that it really wasn't that big of a deal. And even his wife said, "Oh, well, at least it was, he didn't go inside of them." You can't make that judgment. You can't say that because you don't understand what happens to that child in that moment. The way everything just disconnects and no longer makes sense. Safe is not safe. Right is not right. Wrong is not wrong. Nothing makes sense. And the world basically goes black. And I guess what I want to say today is that the darkness that overcomes a child whenever somebody inappropriately touches them or uses them or even sells them cannot be judged by the outside world and how they then move forward. Um, I don't know. I don't know if I'm making any sense at all.
Yeah, you make absolute sense. I've heard this time and time again. Children are so resilient.
No, they stuff it.
They stuff it. And it changes them from the inside out.
Exactly. And eventually it catches up to them. And we studied this. It was like 27, 28, they say, when naturally it just catches up to you. And that's whenever all the flashbacks hit me and my life just tanked.
When you're in that life, it's not just you that's experiencing it. You also see other kids around your community, maybe even kids you see at school or at sports or things like that. Are you ever able to connect with them at all, talk to them, hear from them, or is it all just through shut doors?
Um, Pretty well through shut doors. Whenever I was a kid, at least that's the way that it was. I would see other girls, and they would hardly talk. There was literally no life in their eyes. Um, it's like hell on earth, especially in that little white house. If that little white house were to ever like get burnt down, I promise you, you would hear demons scream because it's that stinking evil.
You've also had people in your older years say things like, well, it's just about the sex, but you've said it's not just about that at all.
Right. And I think, yeah, I've had people say to me, "Oh, do you just like sex?" You obviously don't understand what trafficking is. Like, you are tortured. You are literally a piece, like an organ donor to this person. Like, they use you in horrific ways to where, I mean, you're just not even a human being to them anymore. And they probably, for some of these people, do that purposefully because no right mind would hurt a human being that way. And so they just view you as nothing. And to say that it's just sex, it is nothing like sex, not at all. Like, I want this to be heard because I want for those who are out there who are experiencing that extreme trauma to not feel alone. Like, I feel like I've been sharing, positive truths and where I'm at in my healing. And yes, I am. And God has done a miracle. But I don't lose the thought of where I was and what happened and what shaped me, and that is real. And I want anybody out there who is hurting and stuck in a life like that to know that they are not the only one, and people are not going to think they're crazy. Bad guys do crazy things to you on purpose so that you will sound crazy. But there's people out there who will believe you. I just don't want people, you feel alone. And they do that on purpose. They make you feel like you're nuts. And if I were to repeat to you right now some of the things that were done to me, you would call me nuts. But that's all on purpose.
Yeah.
And the things that I saw done to other girls, and the way that your body and your brain can only take so much.
What other stories do you know of children who have been brought into this world?
A girl that I know who she was sold, but this was not within the ring that I was in. But it's a similar situation, because except hers happened within her family. And this happens a lot, where the father or the mother is addicted to drugs, and the only way they can get enough money to buy the drugs is they decide to sell their kids. And she was sold by her dad and her dad's drug dealer in the basement of her house on weekends. And she went through water torture, which is not uncommon. So when I tell you guys, like, there's a reason why these kids can't speak out. There's a freaking reason. The water torture that she endured, where you feel like you cannot catch your breath. I've been there too. And they hold you under the water until you literally, like, your lungs burn and your head hurts, and they pull you out just enough to get a small breath, and they put you back under. That's the type of things these kids go through to stay quiet. And so she went through water torture. She went through seeing other kids hurt. She went through being left out in the cold in a shed on purpose after water torture, so she was all wet. She would have men come in and pay to have sex with her, and to not just sex, but everything. And she explained it as she would almost try to act like she enjoyed it, because that was her way of getting through it. If I just actually twist my brain to where I enjoy it, then it won't be so bad. And then finally, when she was 15 years old, she thought she was pregnant, and she thought her dad was going to kill her, and she ran, and police found her, and they asked her if she wanted to press charges, which this was back when I was little too. So things were probably different then. And she was too scared and said no. And she ended up she ended up having obviously severe trauma, and was put in a mental hospital. And when I met her or talked to her, she had been in there for 12 years. She didn't know a life outside of that.
You're giving these girls a voice.
They deserve a voice.
Who else have you met that you want to give a voice to?
There was a little girl when I was at the White House. They called her Crazy Amber. And Crazy Amber, every time I saw her, she was in the basement. And she was in a cage. And she acted like an animal. And they would like beat the cage, and she would growl and everything. And they threatened me that if I didn't listen, they were going to make me like Crazy Amber. And I was scared of her. Like she seemed demented. I think she was probably, either she was born mentally ill, or they hurt her so badly she went to that spot. But the only time I saw her outside of that cage was a time that I'm not going to share. But I don't know where she came from. I don't know her real name. I don't know if anybody was even looking for her. But this little white house was on the outskirts of town, and nobody would have suspected. that that's the type of stuff that was going on there. But that's the type of stuff that it's happening in places like this, in abandoned homes, or in trailers or campers out in the woods, barns, all across America. It's happening. And these people, these evil, sick people, are getting these ideas off porn and, YouTube and whatever, the dark web, and then they fulfill it. And they do so much evil crap to these kids that they have no way of voicing it to anybody.
Is it your understanding that Crazy Amber lived there?
That's the way it appeared to me, yeah.
So some girls were brought for an hour or two at a time and then put back home. And then some girls lived at the brothel.
I don't know who else stayed there. I feel like there was one girl when I first came in that was Oriental, and I feel like she may have lived upstairs, but I never went upstairs. So I don't know what was up there.
And have you, I mean, I know that you've told the police and things. Did they ever go investigate that house?
No. Nope. It still sits there, and you can still faintly see the numbers on each door, because each door was numbered. Yeah.
Who else do you remember?
I don't want to share anybody else right now.
How does it feel for you to be able to share their stories when they can't? I mean, we don't know where they are right now or if they're even still alive. But for you to be able to say this happened and it's not okay.
Well, there's part of me that doesn't understand why I got out and they didn't. It doesn't seem fair for anybody to have to go through that stuff. But it's really hard to understand why one person can get out and the other doesn't. The statistic is only 1 to 2% ever get out of trafficking. And I think that's probably the statistic for those who are taken, those who are, whether they run away or they're the ones that probably don't get to go home between each time that they're hurt. And then they say the average lifespan is 7 years. You can't live longer than 7 years in a life like that, mentally, physically, any way, shape, or form. A lot of the people who are severely abused, whether it's trafficking or just, severe abuse, chronic abuse, their coping skills can then end up being what kills them.
Right.
And I remember I had a friend who, she was tricked into trafficking by another girlfriend at school, another classmate. And she went one weekend and was raped by 4 men. And from that moment on, she became owned by somebody. And they threatened her family if she didn't comply. And so that became her lifestyle. Like they threatened her until she became so numb and addicted to drugs herself that it just became her life. They didn't have to threaten her anymore. But people on the outside looking in would just say, it's just another girl who'd made wrong choices, and here she is addicted to drugs. She gets what she deserves. You have no idea. No idea. because we don't have safe places for these people to go. We think it's our own fault. She thought it was her fault.
Well, and the story too is that girls that end up going to jail, right? Prostitution's
Yes.
illegal.
Yes, exactly.
And
Pimp stays out.
so instead of the John or the handler going to jail. Yeah.
Yeah, that you would be surprised. And honestly, you'd be surprised how many are in jail for prostitution when they were actually trafficked, and how many don't even realize they were being trafficked. They think it was their own choice. If you would ask them, they wouldn't know.
Right, because that's the way they want it. That's the way
Right.
the perpetrators want it. They always use the words "we did this" or "look at what you did" or things like that. So they're placing that blame, and especially as a girl, a little girl, you have no idea.
Right.
And so you kind of aged out. There was
I think I aged out from that particular ring. I do think they were more into the child stuff. Oftentimes, purposefully, I think they sell you to other people, so your ownership changes. It's another way to keep under the radar as far as cops and stuff go. And as far as finding, like the ones who are taken, I remember seeing many girls as an adult. This is now as an adult when I ended up back in the life, being transported from one car to another car and ownership changing. And I remember being sat in front of a laptop and different men interviewing me, not like an interview you would think. Um, but they were wanting to possibly buy me, and it happens everywhere. I mean, I could have been there were people that interviewed or whatever, I don't even know what the word would be, from overseas. Um, I had one guy I remember who, I remember when I told Granny this, and she said, "Surely this isn't true." No, I don't know. I just know what he told me, that he worked on a Navy ship and they had one or two women who would be on there 24/7 for that. They would never be given clothes or anything. That's just their job.
so even as aging out at 8th grade from that specific ring, you were most likely sold to another adult ring of some sort, really never getting out.
Yeah.
Do people know who their handler is? Is it someone like your coach who's in your life and you think it's a relationship, or sometimes the handlers are puppet masters pulling strings and you really don't even know who they are?
Yeah, I'm sure it's both, for sure. There's times, especially as an adult, where I've been hurt and I've been told that they are my new owner. I don't know if that's true or not. So I don't know if there is, like, obviously they don't give you details of how things are done. All you know is you're being harassed and hurt. And when I say hurt, Granny talks to me about this a lot too. Hurt to people does not mean the same as hurt to me.
We'd be kicked off YouTube if we used all the words, but yeah, no, it's torturous.
And I
Torturous.
know, like, there's people who just don't want to believe this stuff exists. I've had people who are like, I believe her, but I can't let my mind go there because I won't be able to sleep at night. But what about for those who are actually living it, you know?
Were there other kids at the school that you knew of that were also in this situation, or at that point when you were a child, you just knew of you?
Well, there was one. And I talk about her a little bit in my book. But she's made it very clear that she does not want to be involved in the justice side of things, of even talking about this. Her and I have had a conversation. I know she was a part of it when I was little, like 9. And then her family moved away. And she wants no part of coming forward. She wants to try to live her life. And I feel like God gives each of us what we need for healing. And I pray that she's doing what God has told her as far as her healing goes. For me, it is speaking out and sharing. And there's just too much in my heart and in my mind and in my gut that I need or want people to understand, because I see it. There's, when you're a survivor of this type of stuff, there's 2 things you can pick up on. You can see hurt in a kid's eyes and know that it's not normal, something's going on. And you can also see a look in a perpetrator's eyes and it's not normal. Like, you've seen it enough to be able to pick it up on people. Not always, it's not like 100%, but I was always told when I was at that safe house, they would say we could bring a line of guys in, and these girls who had been trafficked could tell you within 1 minute who's the pimp. You just maybe it's experience, maybe it's discernment, I don't know. But
So even in your small town, the girls that you saw at the brothel and in these situations were not necessarily kids at school that you saw in your playground.
right, I'm sure they did that on purpose.
Right.
They isolate you on purpose.
Right. Well, and in my mind, I think, well, if you see another girl there, then maybe at recess you can go and say, hey, do you tell me
Right?
the story, or what can we do? And even as kids can bond together in some sort of way. But even if there were other kids at your school, he made sure that nobody saw each other at those situations.
Yeah, as far as being hurt, yes. We've had one girl who came forward who what she has said so far is she would be taken to that White House, and as the men would come in, she was supposed to hand out cigars. So that's all I've heard so far from her, but she's not going to probably share details with just anybody, but
Yeah.
she's too scared to come forward as far as police go, and I can't blame her.
When adults, well, and this is a interesting thing to think about too, right? Because you think as a child, if a child comes forward, it's clearly abuse, or it's they don't have the ability to consent. When an adult comes forward, you can see that the tables are turned a little bit, where it could be seen, well, it's consented, they're an adult, they have a choice, and that's just not true.
No, and nobody in their right mind wants to go through that stuff. No, I was told that the rumor through the police station was that I was just a prostitute selling myself. And that's a terrible feeling when you know that's what the cops think of you.
Well, then when you think of not feeling heard, and not feeling like you can get help.
And that you don't matter.
Yeah.
Eventually, people stop trying to get out.
And that's when hope has been lost. How long as an adult did it go on? And did you ever lose hope as an adult?
Yes. No, I was numb. I was not even. When Granny entered my life, she says I was basically a shell of a person. Like, I couldn't cry. I couldn't, because disassociation became a part of my life as a kid. And that's how I was able to try to live as normal as possible despite what was going on. But it didn't last very long. But then as an adult, that dissociation would take place. And I not only was dissociating at times, but I was also living as if I was still 9 years old. I felt like I was never safe. Nothing felt safe. My house didn't feel safe, and driving, nothing felt safe. Um, so I was in chronic fight or flight mode all the time. There'd be times when something would happen that would scare me, and my instinct was to just run. I didn't even know where I was running to. I would just run. And sometimes then, if they triggered me with something, let's say in the middle of the night, I'm laying in bed and I hear a noise that sounds like one of the tortures that I endured as a kid, and I get scared, and my instinct is to run. I run, and then outside the house is a car waiting. And so it started up again in like 2014 was when I was hurt for the first time. And then 2000
as an adult.
as an adult. And then 2017 is when Granny entered the picture and we started fighting back. But it was interesting because not, I mean, interesting isn't the right word, but you could tell when Granny entered my life and those around her who were supporting me, it was like, okay, we're going to go to the police and we're going to share this information and it's going to be done in a month. And I remember her taking me to the state police for the first time, and she told me, this is the hardest thing you'll ever have to do. And then it's just like nothing got solved. Nothing was stopping these guys. Law enforcement wasn't stopping them. The fact that I was getting help and speaking out um, only made them pursue me harder to keep me quiet. And so safety, I wasn't safe until years later. And even still, it's
No, so that's 3, 14, 15, 16, 17, 3 years as an adult where you were trafficked. Yet you kept, like, how many people did you talk to before you found Granny? How many people did you try to raise your hand? Because again, you're testing the waters with people. You're not telling them the full story. You're
right.
trying to be like, excuse me, I need some help. I mean, you can imagine how hard it is to ask for help in general, and then to have this deep of a kind of pit you feel like you're in.
Right.
How,
Uh,
I mean, and you don't have to name names or numbers, but it's really just like you gave up hope in a sense, but yet there was still a bit of hope because you kept trying to reach out.
yeah, and I would go through spurts of it too. Like there'd be times when God would just light this spark of all of a sudden, hey, ask this person. See if like give them little bits and see how it goes. One thing though that I feel like was interesting is my exterior was diminishing. Like I was losing a ton of weight. I was not healthy. I would wear sweatshirts and sweatpants in summertime to hide bruises and cuts. I was visibly down. Like I would try to perk up for people and act like everything was okay, but it wouldn't take a rocket scientist to see I was not okay. And I think, you know, people jumped on the eating disorder side of things. And it's like, okay, you need to make sure you start eating. Okay. Like we have to get to the root of the issue and figure out what took this person down this path, because starving yourself isn't normal. There's a reason. Hurting yourself isn't normal. There's a reason, even as an adult. And it's a coping skill, it's a way of survival. And just seeing the outward side of things is not enough. You've got to get to the heart.
And so you've said, even like when you were for those 3 years, and even when you met Granny in 2017, not only were you being hurt on a fairly consistent basis, but when you weren't being hurt, when you were at home, you were living as though you were 9. So a full adult, taking care of myself, eating, making food, getting the mail, paying bills, forget work, like even cleaning the house, all of that wasn't something you were capable of at that time.
No, and not only was I living as if I was 9 years old, but I was a 9-year-old who had no self-worth. Like, I didn't want to take care of myself because I didn't see worth in myself. Um, there comes a point where you can see like you're falling apart. Like, and in your mind, you're thinking, surely this is noticeable to everybody around me, but nobody says anything. So maybe it doesn't matter.
Was there a part of you that wanted somebody to come in and say, Rachel, what is going on?
Yeah. And
How
that's
can
what
I help?
Granny did. Yes.
Okay.
That's exactly what Granny did.
You reached your hand, but she grabbed it. That's why we have a granny program.
That's right.
It truly is. If she hadn't said yes and grabbed your hand when you reached for her, you wouldn't be here today.
No. And not just grab my hand, but hang on. She believed every single thing I told her. And then she's experiencing the pieces of hell that I was going through then. Like, it was not fun. It was scary. It was, would keep her up at night. And uh but because she put her hand out and grabbed me and held on, it was like, okay, there is worth in me, maybe. And if she sees worth in me, maybe God sees worth in me. Like, it's a ripple effect.
Mm-hmm. The girls that you saw, did any of them have fight left in them, or most of them shells and had given up too?
Most of them, most of them were shells. Most of them were in survival mode of just doing exactly what they were ordered to do. Guys, I mean, seriously, there was hand gestures that would be given by an owner to one of the girls of exactly what pose to go into. Like, it was as if they were an owner of an animal, you know?
Now, one thought that just came to my mind is I'm thinking of the porn side of things. And um, it sounds like a lot of the several, I mean, you can let me know that most things or some things were videotaped to be sold, not necessarily a video. I mean, I've never seen it porn. I've never seen it. So when I have hear about it, I think it's like a production studio and it's created for the web. But what I hear you say is, no, it's torturous, it's happening, and they just happen to videotape it to then also sell.
Yeah. And they'll either make it appear like the woman is acting, or but it's legit rapes and tortures. Sometimes the women on there will be forced to act like they like it, and they're going to be, tortured if they don't. So yeah, porn is it's watching
Crime.
it's a crime. You are watching somebody be humiliated and destroyed from the inside out. Like, it's awful. And it supports trafficking. It supports these traffickers. It gives them more money. They're going to get more victims. And it's closer to home than you think, especially now that you have, COVID and these years of where people are isolated in home with nothing but their phone. Kids are being hurt right and left. And they maybe aren't even physically being touched, but they can still be sold if they are forced into taking a picture or a video and sending it to somebody that threatens their family or whatever. That's still trafficking. And they know that that picture, that video, they can never get back.
And I know you wanted to kind of shine a light into the realities of what trafficking looks like to a little girl.
It's so dang hard because it's like, I don't want to share too much because I'm afraid I'm going to like scare people. That's the people pleaser in me. Like I don't want to hurt you by sharing my story. But then in a sense, like if everybody just continues to stay quiet and we don't really see what it actually is, then it's going to continue.
Well, and I also think that it can be easy for people to minimize or to say that happened when you were a kid or whatever. But what we're learning, right, is that the trauma that happens at any age, but specifically in your formative years, changes your brain. It changes your brain, changes the way you view yourself and the world. And then we have a whole lot of adults who haven't learned healthy coping skills,
Right.
who aren't able to function because they are still living in that trauma brain and really have never been able to get out. Is there anything from not even just being hurt, but just how you responded and had to live life in this like dualistic way that you want people to know?
Well, honestly, I feel like I still somewhat have to because there's so many good things going on in my life. Stop SIS is an amazing ministry to get to be a part of, and my kids and my husband, and there's so many good things, but the trauma's still there. Like the flashbacks are still there. And it's like, it is almost like I still have to live in these two extremes.
Mm-hmm.
But the way that God made our brains to fight this stuff, like I don't think it's on accident that disassociation exists. And as I'm learning more about my brain and how powerful it is and how I can take back control of it, all these different pieces of our body, like the vagus nerve, like things like that God gives us to help us in difficult situations, and knowing that he was with me that entire time when I was being hurt. Like I often have people say, like, how can God be a good God and you still get trafficked? Well, God didn't cause the trafficking. And we live in a free will, sinful world, and evil exists, and men are choosing to hurt somebody. And God gives us free will on purpose, like, so we can freely choose him, but people are not choosing him. They're choosing another path. And everybody becomes prey to that at some point in their life, that everybody has trauma. But the fact that God never left me and was with me and helped me, and brought people like Granny into my life, brought like the Stop SIS into my life, and gave me these stepping stones to get out of that pit myself, is miraculous. This whole thing is miraculous. And then I heard just this morning about a young kid who's going through some really hard stuff and just happened to stumble upon our podcast and said it's helping in his healing. And part of me, like, I want to be a loud voice for the healing. Yes, don't get me wrong. But I also want people to be validated in their hurt and know that they're not alone in their hurt. And it doesn't matter if it was a one-time thing or a 10-year thing. You have a reason to feel the way that you do. And it was not okay. And it was not your fault. That healing is still possible. But I want to validate those who have been trafficked, those who have been severely traumatized, sexually abused, family members do whatever. I want them to have a voice because it matters.
It absolutely does. You creating the brave space for you to share your story, and you even bringing it to light, will give other people the confidence to do the same thing. And I think that's the sword that we live on, that double-edged sword of acknowledging and sitting in that pain and being honest, radically honest about the suck, and still living our life and loving our kids and, going to soccer games and enjoying the fruit of what healing can bring.
Yes.
And it doesn't mean the trauma is gone, but we don't always want to live there or need to live there. But we do want to acknowledge both sides.
Yes. Yeah. And there may be a point where, God gives me more to share with you guys. But for the moment, that's it.
Yeah. Well, those who are listening, if you want to reach out and share your story, we have a couple ways that you can do that. You can email stopsis@protonmail.com. You can fill out, there's a Google form I think we created. It's on the Instagram page that you can share, put out there's questions, and you can share your story or your questions with us that we can then use on the podcast. If you are somebody who has gone through trauma work and you are ready to kind of take a next step on your healing journey, then consider joining us in the Stop SIS 90-day U-turn, where we aren't sitting in the trauma anymore, but we're really working to retrain our brain, because there's a reason why you stay 9. And that's because one side of the coin is more developed than the other. That's where you lived for years.
Mhm.
We also want to gain strength on the other side. And that's where 90-day U-turn is a step in the process that comes in, because you have a lot of wisdom to share, a lot of healing to share, a lot of certainly hard stuff to share, but we're proud of you for having another side, for growing that,
Thanks.
taking steps.
Well, I don't think you can see how big of a miracle it is that I'm sitting here unless you know just how dark the darkness was.
Read her book, Open Blind Eyes. The link is in the description. And I have friends who will read it and they'll reach out to me and we're like, we need to go for a walk and process this and talk through this. Oh my goodness. But they say the same thing. They say it's a miracle that she's as sane as she is. And you have hard days, but you are not
Yes.
mentally ill.
Thank you.
You are not a crazy person. And it is a miracle that you're as
It really, really
whole
is.
as you are today.
Yep. It's a God thing, 100%.
Yeah.
And I think it gives me a chance to share not only what I saw in the darkness, but now as I'm in the light, I can share with others so that we can help more people who are still in the dark.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think it's no matter how old anybody is, whether they get out at 50 or they got out at 15 or whatever, we want to be a part of the healing journey for you. So Rachel, thank you for sharing your story
Thanks.
today. I know it's not easy to talk about the suck, but it's radically honest. And sometimes we need to go there. So if you guys have any questions, post in the comments or write to our email. And we're headed on a retreat with 7 ladies in the next couple days, and we just can't wait to share that with you too. So know that you are heard, know that you are loved, that the darkness exists, but you don't have to stay there.
Right.
And I'm going to end with an I declare. I declare God's dream for my life is coming to pass. It will not be stopped by people, disappointments, or adversities. God has solutions to every problem I face already lined up. The right people and the right breaks are in my future. I am fulfilling my destiny. This is my declaration, and this is my declaration for you. Have an awesome day, my friends. We'll see you next week. Thank you so much for listening to this powerful episode of Stop Suffering in Silence. If you are interested in booking Rachel to speak at your school, your church, or on your podcast, then please email openblindeyes@protonmail.com. If you are interested in sponsoring a survivor on their healing journey and would like to donate to Stop SIS, then please check out the link in the description box or show notes below, or you can email stopsis@protonmail.com. And finally, if you are currently suffering in silence, or you know somebody who is, whether they're dealing with a current trauma or one from the past, then we will always recommend that you reach out to your local resources and find a counselor that you can trust, because nobody is meant to suffer alone. Have an amazing week, and thank you for being here.